The most dangerous person in your life isn't your competitor, your critic, or your circumstance. It's the voice in your head that addresses you like you're worthless. That voice has sabotaged more dreams, derailed more destinies, and destroyed more potential than any external obstacle ever could. It whispers limitations while others with fewer advantages speak possibility to themselves. It suggests caution when others with greater challenges command themselves to advance. It counsels you to settle when others with more significant barriers refuse to compromise with their potential. The difference between extraordinary and ordinary isn't talent, it's self-talk. The people you admire don't necessarily know more than you. They simply speak to themselves with authority you've never dared to use. The words you speak to yourself right now are creating the life you will live tomorrow. Your self-talk is not just casual conversation. It is prophecy. Most people live small lives because they speak small words to themselves. But you were born to rule. When was the last time you listened to yourself? I mean, truly listen to the words you whisper in your own ear. Those private conversations shape your destiny more than any outside voice ever could. The greatest tragedy I've witnessed is someone with royal potential who speaks to themselves like a slave. I met a man in South Africa some years ago. When I first saw him, he was hunched over, eyes downcast, voice barely above a whisper. His business had failed, his marriage was struggling, and he felt like a walking disappointment. But when I saw him again just 1 year later, he stood tall, spoke with conviction, and radiated an authority that commanded respect without demanding it. I asked him, what changed? He said something I'll never forget. I stopped talking to myself like I was nothing and started speaking to myself like I was everything I was meant to become. This man discovered a truth that the most successful people on earth understand. The most important conversation you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. Think about it. You talk to yourself more than you talk to anyone else. You speak to yourself when you wake up, when you look in the mirror, when you face challenges, when you succeed, when you fail. That constant dialogue shapes your beliefs, and your beliefs shape your actions, and your actions shape your life. Many people wonder why they can't move forward. They blame circumstances, other people, lack of opportunity. But the real chain holding them back is their own tongue, not what they say to others, but what they say to themselves. I studied kings for many years, not just the kings in history books, but the kings and queens of industry, innovation, and impact. And I noticed something profound. They all speak to themselves differently. They don't ask, can I? They declare, I will. They don't wonder, why me? They state, why not me? They don't complain, this is too hard. They affirm, I am equal to this challenge. Let me tell you about Sarah. She wasn't born into wealth or privilege. She grew up in a small town where people rarely left, rarely dreamed, rarely believed they could be more. But Sarah had something special. Not talent, not connections, but a different kind of self-talk when she decided to start her own business. Everyone told her she would fail. The economy was bad. She had no experience. The market was saturated. But Sarah spoke to herself differently. Every morning she would look in the mirror and say, you are resourceful. You are innovative. You will find a way where others see no way. She faced rejection after rejection. Investor after investor turned her down. But while others would have told themselves, this is hopeless, Sarah told herself, every no brings me closer to my yes. While others would have said, I'm not good enough, Sarah said, I'm learning and growing stronger every day. 3 years later, her company revolutionized her industry. When asked about her success, she said, I failed just as much as anyone else would have. The difference was how I spoke to myself after each failure. The problem with most people is that they use language that diminishes their power. They say, I'll try instead of I will. They say, I hope instead of I know. They say, I wish instead of I choose. Royal language is language of certainty, not chance. Kings don't try, kings do. Kings don't hope, kings decree. Kings don't wish, kings command. Your mouth is the pen that writes your future. Your tongue is the paintbrush that colors your world. The words you speak to yourself create the landscape of your life. I've worked with heads of state, CEOs of multinational corporations, and influencers who shape global culture. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that their greatness began when they changed how they spoke to themselves. When you talk to yourself like royalty, your mind begins to create solutions instead of excuses. Your brain starts to notice opportunities instead of obstacles. Your spirit begins to rise to challenges instead of shrinking from them. But here's what's critical to understand. This isn't about false affirmations or empty positive thinking. Kings don't lie to themselves. They speak truth, but they speak the highest truth. The highest truth is not that you are weak, but that weakness is temporary. The highest truth is not that you have failed, but that failure is a teacher. The highest truth is not that you are broken, but that brokenness can lead to breakthrough. Let me be clear. Speaking to yourself like royalty doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means interpreting reality through the lens of your potential, not your limitations. Every king and queen throughout history understood a fundamental principle. Their words created worlds. When they spoke, things happened. Mountains moved. Armies mobilized. Cities were built. Not because they had special powers, but because they understood the power of authoritative speech. You have the same power in your life. You are the ruler of your domain. Your mind is your kingdom. Your life is your territory. And the words you speak to yourself are your royal decrees. So let me ask you, if you spoke to yourself the way you would speak to someone you deeply respect, someone with unlimited potential and undeniable value, how would your life change? If you addressed yourself with the dignity and honor you would show to royalty, what mountains would you climb? What fears would you conquer? What dreams would you pursue? Many people speak life to others but death to themselves. They encourage their friends but discourage their own hearts. They praise their children but criticize their own efforts. They celebrate others' small wins but dismiss their own progress. This is a contradiction that cannot produce greatness. You cannot water your neighbor's garden while throwing acid on your own seeds and expect to harvest abundance. Change begins with awareness. For the next 24 hours, I want you to monitor your self-talk. Listen to the words you say to yourself when you make a mistake. Pay attention to the tone you use when you face a challenge. Notice the language you employ when you look at your reflection. Then ask yourself, would I speak this way to someone I consider great? Would I use these words if I were addressing a king or queen? If the answer is no, then why would you speak this way to yourself? You are the ruler of your destiny. You are the monarch of your mind. You are the sovereign of your soul. Speaking to yourself like royalty isn't arrogance. It's alignment with truth. You were created to rule, to have dominion, to exercise authority, not over others, but over yourself, over your thoughts, over your emotions, over your actions, over your destiny. So from this moment forward, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth toward yourself. Speak only what builds up, what empowers, what aligns with your highest potential. Address yourself with the respect and dignity that royalty deserves. Because when you speak to yourself like you would to a king, you begin to live like one. Your self-talk reveals your self-concept. The language you use when no one is listening exposes who you truly believe you are. And here's a profound truth. There is the language of royalty and there is the language of slavery. They create two entirely different realities. I was in Singapore some years ago meeting with business leaders. One man stood out, not because he was the wealthiest or most accomplished, but because of how he carried himself. When he spoke, people leaned in. When he made a suggestion, others took notes. When he asked questions, the room fell silent. Later, I had dinner with him and discovered something fascinating. This man grew up in extreme poverty. His family of 7 lived in a one-room dwelling with no running water. But his grandmother taught him something that changed everything. She told him, when you speak to yourself, use the words of a king, not a beggar. Beggars ask, kings declare. Beggars hope, kings expect. Beggars accept. Beggars accept what is given. Kings create what is needed. Every morning, this man would practice speaking to himself with royal language when faced with problems. He wouldn't say, I can't handle this. He would say, I have what it takes to solve this. He wouldn't say, I'm worried about the outcome. He would say, I am directing this situation towards success. Over decades, this royal self-talk transformed not just his mindset, but his physical presence. People who knew nothing about his background sensed his authority. His environment began responding to him differently. This is the power of royal self-communication. It's not just positive thinking. It's authoritative declaration. When you study the psychology of human achievement, you discover that your brain doesn't distinguish between what you tell it repeatedly and what is objectively true. Your nervous system responds to the words you feed it. Speak limitation, and your brain creates biochemical responses that limit you. Speak possibility, and your neurology begins creating pathways to achievement. There are 3 principles of royal self-communication that I've observed in the most impactful people across every culture and industry. First, kings speak in absolutes, not maybes, when you talk to yourself. Eliminate words like try, might, hopefully, and possibly. These are the words of uncertainty. Instead, use will, am, do, and create. These are words of certainty. Certainty is the domain of royalty. I once asked a successful surgeon how she handled the pressure of holding lives in her hands. She said, when I scrub in, I tell myself, I am precise, I am focused, I will succeed. I never say, I hope this goes well, or I'll try my best. Those words create doubt, and doubt creates hesitation. In surgery, hesitation can be fatal. The second principle, kings speak from vision, not circumstance. Most people's self-talk is reactive, responding to what is happening around them. The royal mindset speaks from what they have determined will happen. They don't let conditions dictate their internal dialogue. When Nelson Mandela was imprisoned on Robben Island, he refused to speak to himself as a prisoner. In his autobiography, he shared that he maintained his dignity by how he addressed himself in his thoughts, while guards tried to reduce him to a number. In his mind, he spoke to himself as the future leader of a free South Africa. His circumstances said prisoner, but his self-talk said president. The third principle, kings take ownership in their language. They never speak as victims. Listen to how most people talk to themselves. Why does this always happen to me? They're making it impossible for me to succeed. I never get the opportunities I deserve. This is the language of powerlessness. Royal self-talk sounds different. I choose how to respond to this challenge. I will create a new approach since this path is blocked. I am responsible for creating my opportunities. Your environment responds to your self-concept. People treat you based on how you treat yourself. Opportunities come or avoid you depending on whether your internal dialogue makes you magnetic or repellent to success. I witnessed this truth in a remarkable way with a school principal I worked with in Atlanta. When he took over, the school was known for violence, poor performance, and hopelessness. Most educators had given up on the students. This principal told me, before I could change the school, I had to change how I talked to myself about these kids in this community. Every morning, I would tell myself, you are walking into a building full of future doctors, engineers, artists, and leaders. Their potential is not determined by their zip code. His self-talk transformed his expectations, which changed his behavior, which altered his impact. Within 3 years, that school became one of the most improved in the state. The same students, the same neighborhood, the same challenges, but a leader with different self-talk. That's the power of speaking to yourself like royalty. It doesn't just change you, it changes everything and everyone around you. When kings and queens throughout history spoke, their words carried weight because they first spoke those words to themselves with conviction. They practiced in private what they pronounced in public. Your private self-talk is the rehearsal for your public life. If you flub your lines when addressing yourself, you'll stumble when facing the world. But when you speak to yourself with the clarity, authority, and dignity of royalty, that inner confidence radiates outward. So I challenge you, elevate your self-talk to royal status. Address yourself with the honor due to someone destined to rule their domain. Speak not as who you once were, or even as who you are now, but as who you are becoming. Because royal self-talk is both the seed and evidence of transformation. Your brain changes physically based on the words you speak to yourself. This isn't philosophy, it's neuroscience. When you consistently speak to yourself with royal authority, you create new neural pathways that make power your default setting rather than your occasional visitor. Scientists call this neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new connections. But I call it the hardware upgrade that follows your software update. Change your self-talk first, and your brain will literally rewire itself to match your words. Let me tell you about Marcus, a community organizer I met in Detroit. His neighborhood had been written off by politicians, abandoned by businesses, and overlooked by philanthropists. Most residents had internalized the message that their community was beyond hope. Marcus told me, I was caught in the same thinking until I realized something had to change. And that something was how I spoke to myself about our possibilities. He began speaking to himself differently. Instead of saying, we're stuck with what we have, he said, we have everything we need to transform this place. Instead of no one cares about us, he told himself, we haven't yet shown them why they should invest here. Instead of this is just how things are, he declared, this is a community in transformation. Marcus started a small urban farm on an abandoned lot. When neighbors questioned him, he spoke with such conviction about their community's future that they couldn't help but listen. His transformed self-talk became transformed community talk 3 years later. That single lot had expanded to 12 urban gardens, a weekend market, a youth employment program, and a community kitchen. The same people who once said impossible were now saying, what's next? A change in one man's self-talk sparked a revolution in an entire neighborhood. This is the power of speaking to yourself like royalty. It creates possibilities that simply don't exist when you speak to yourself like a victim. How do you practically transform your self-talk? I've studied this question for decades and discovered 4 techniques that work across cultures, personalities, and circumstances. First, audit your current self-talk for 1 full day. Carry a small notebook and write down the phrases you say to yourself most frequently. You'll be shocked at how harsh, limiting, or fearful much of it is. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. Second, create royal replacements for each negative pattern. If you catch yourself saying, I always mess this up, your royal replacement might be, I am mastering this skill more each time I practice. The key is specificity. Vague affirmations create vague results. Third, practice out loud. There's a different level of power when you hear your voice speaking royal truth about yourself. Find a private place each morning and speak your royal declarations aloud. Your ears need to hear what your mouth is saying. Fourth, surround these declarations with evidence. Your mind craves proof. When you tell yourself, I am becoming a masterful public speaker, add evidence. I've already conquered my fear of the stage. I've received positive feedback on my last 3 presentations. I study this craft daily. Evidence turns affirmation into conviction. The compound effect of elevated self-talk cannot be overstated. Small shifts in your internal dialogue, practiced consistently, create massive shifts in your external results. Most people want overnight transformation, but that's not how lasting change works. Speaking to yourself like royalty is a practice, not an event. Kings weren't built in a day. They were formed through consistent small actions that aligned with their identity. Many of you are still speaking words passed down to you through generations. Words of limitation, words of fear, words of know your place. These words were chains meant to bind you to smallness. But right now, you can break generational patterns of negative self-talk. You can be the ancestor that future generations thank for speaking a new reality into existence. You can be the one who decided that royalty begins with you when you speak to yourself like a king or queen. You start a new dynasty of possibility in your bloodline. You create permission for those who come after you to do the same. Your royal self-talk is both your inheritance and your legacy. A king's authority is absolute within his domain. His word becomes action. His thoughts become policy. His vision becomes reality. And your domain, your sphere of influence, responds to your internal authority in exactly the same way. Most people never grasp this truth. The territory of your life expands or contracts based on how you speak to yourself when facing its borders. Let me tell you about Elijah, a young man I met in London. Nothing about his background suggested greatness. He grew up in government housing, dropped out of school at 16, and spent his early 20s working minimum wage jobs. On paper, his options were limited. But Elijah had one extraordinary quality. He refused to speak to himself based on his circumstances when he looked in the mirror. He addressed himself as someone with unique purpose. When he made mistakes, he spoke to himself as someone learning valuable lessons, not as someone defined by failure. At 27, with no formal education or connections, Elijah started a transportation company with a single used van. People mocked him. Banks rejected him. Family members expressed concern. But his self-talk remained royal. I am building something significant. My past does not determine my future. Obstacles are merely opportunities for innovation. Today's fleet numbers over 200 vehicles. He employs people from his old neighborhood, giving them the chance no one gave him. The territory of his influence expanded because he refused to constrict his self-talk. This is the pattern I've observed across every success story that defied odds. People who speak to themselves like royalty see opportunities invisible to those with slave mentality. Where others see barriers, they see doorways not yet opened. Where others see endings, they see transitions. Where others see rejection, they see redirection. Your self-talk creates your perception filters. Speak to yourself like a victim, and you'll only notice evidence that confirms your victimhood. Speak to yourself like royalty, and your mind will automatically begin searching for resources, solutions, and possibilities. The way you respond to challenges reveals whether your self-talk is royal or common. Listen to someone facing a serious setback. The language they use tells you everything about how they speak to themselves when no one is listening. Those with royal self-talk say things like, "This situation is serving my growth. I will extract value from this challenge. This temporary setback is redirecting me toward greater success." Those with slave self-talk say, "Why does this always happen to me? I guess this wasn't meant to be. I knew I would fail eventually." Your response to difficulty is a learned language, and you can learn a new one. Speaking to yourself like royalty creates a ripple effect beyond your personal achievement. It changes how you interact with everyone in your path. When you address yourself with dignity, you cannot help but address others the same way. When you honor your own potential, you naturally honor the potential in those around you. When you grant yourself permission to grow through failure, you extend that same grace to others. The kingdom you create within yourself becomes the kingdom you establish around yourself. Your royal self-talk doesn't just elevate you, it lifts everyone in your orbit. This is true dominion, not power over others, but power that empowers others. Not authority that diminishes, but authority that dignifies. So speak to yourself like the ruler you were born to be, and watch as your domain expands to match your declaration. What you say to yourself today echoes through generations tomorrow. Your self-talk creates more than personal success. It establishes a legacy that outlives you. Let me tell you about Maya, a school teacher I met in Johannesburg. Her story changed how I understand the power of royal self-talk. Maya grew up during apartheid in a system designed to convince her she was less than unworthy, second class. The external voices were relentless in their message. Stay in your place, accept your limitations, be grateful for whatever scraps fall from the table. But Maya's grandmother taught her a secret practice. Every night before bed, she was to stand tall and speak to herself as royalty. "You are not what they say you are," her grandmother instructed. "You are descended from kings and queens. The circumstances of your birth do not define the circumstances of your life." Even as a young girl, Maya practiced this ritual faithfully. When teachers told her not to dream too big, she would whisper to herself, "I determine the size of my dreams." When signs and systems restricted her movements, she would tell herself, "My spirit cannot be contained by their limitations." Maya eventually became a teacher herself, but unlike her own teachers, she refused to perpetuate messages of limitation. She spoke to her students, most from severely disadvantaged backgrounds, the way her grandmother had taught her to speak to herself. "You're not defined by your postal code," she would tell them. "You are not limited by your family history. You are not determined by others' expectations." At first, the children didn't believe her. They had already internalized the messages of their environment. But Maya was persistent. She created a daily ritual where each student would stand and declare their value, their potential, their royalty. 20 years later, from her small classroom in one of the poorest areas of Johannesburg, have emerged doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, and yes, teachers who now carry on her practice. One of her former students, now a celebrated architect, told me, "Maya didn't just teach us academics. She taught us how to speak to ourselves when the world tried to silence us. She gave us a language of possibility that no circumstance could take away." This is the generational power of royal self-talk. Maya's grandmother's words to her didn't just transform one life, they've now transformed thousands. How do you implement this practice daily? Here are 3 commitments that will anchor royal self-talk in your life. First, create morning and evening rituals. The first words you speak to yourself each day and the last words you hear each night form the bookends of your consciousness. Make them royal declarations. Second, prepare yourself for triggers. Identify the situations, people, or challenges that typically cause your self-talk to deteriorate. Create specific royal responses for each trigger before they occur. Third, build a council of truth speakers. Surround yourself with people who speak to you as royalty and who will remind you of your true identity when you forget. Your self-talk and your purpose are inseparably connected. The words you speak to yourself either align you with your highest calling or distract you from it. There is no neutral self-talk. It either propels you toward your destiny or pulls you away from it. When you speak to yourself like a king or queen, you activate the authority necessary to fulfill your purpose. Purpose without authority is merely good intention. Authority without purpose is merely wasted potential. When the two align through royal self-talk, you become unstoppable. I leave you with this truth. The words you speak to yourself are not just heard in your own ears. They are heard in the courts of destiny. They are heard in the future your children will inhabit. They are heard in the legacy you will leave. So speak to yourself like royalty. Not just for your own success, but for the kingdom you were born to establish. Your royal self-talk today creates the royal reality of tomorrow. Speak, and it shall be so.